consórcio em agroecologia e desenvolvimento rural sustentável realiza o intercâmbio de estudantes universitários entre o Brasil e os Estados Unidos.
The FIPSI-CAPES consortium of universities between Brazil and the U.S. has been a very effective way to get people traveling and talking to each other and experiencing the other culture. I think the major impact will be on the individuals themselves. The particular projects people do are far less important than the cultural experiences, getting to know people, meeting families, getting to know the other culture, because these are things I think help lead to true understanding from one country to another and will help us in the long term to achieve a more stable world order.
Os Estados Unidos, país com os maiores índices de desenvolvimento econômico e lugar onde os estudantes brasileiros realizam seus projetos, conta com uma área de mais de 9,5 milhões de quilômetros quadrados e com população próxima aos 300 milhões de habitantes, um pouco maior e mais populoso que o Brasil. Mesmo representando apenas 4% da população global, os Estados Unidos sozinhos utilizam 25% de todo o petróleo produzido no mundo, fazendo dele o maior consumidor deste importante recurso natural. Fortemente relacionado a diversos problemas socioambientais, o petróleo é a base do desenvolvimento econômico estadunidense, que move toda a sua indústria e a tão controversa sociedade de consumo. A opção pelo modelo industrial estende-se também às atividades na agricultura, marcando profundamente a paisagem dos Estados Unidos na região conhecida como Cinturão do Milho. Este vídeo, resultado de um projeto desenvolvido em Nebraska, apresenta as características do modelo agroindustrial e suas consequências, assim como as bases conceituais da agricultura sustentável, através da realidade de alguns agricultores na região do centro-oeste dos Estados Unidos.
The role of the Midwest is extremely important in U.S. agriculture. This is where the majority of the maize, wheat, and soybeans are produced. The majority of the cattle, the majority of the hogs are produced in this part of the country. The majority of the milk also. So this is it's called the breadbasket for a good reason. It's the major agricultural area and influences prices not just in the U.S. but around the world for these major commodities. Historically, these were mixed farms since the times of homesteading, when people first arrived and broke out the sod, created farms and ranches in the western part.
My father rented a farm for a while and farmed, and he kept cattle, and so I was very interested in that as a boy. And then my grandfather also had a family business, but he'd also farmed and had actually homesteaded, and I was always very intrigued by those stories.
My grandfather was a gardener, and as a young child, I always watched him work in the garden, and he would push me around in the wheelbarrow. And
what I can remember in the early days of my dad, he very early on used fewer chemicals, had more of a rotational, more of a diverse mix. I can remember him growing small grains, wheat, oats.
My grandfather had a U-pick strawberry farm. People would come out and pick their own strawberries. And he had a farm that he used to have sheep and crops and hay, but that was before I was born. I don't have any memory of that.
We raised cattle when I was a kid. I worked on a ranch when I was young, and then I roped calves and cows, steers for a lot of years.
I was born and raised on a farm in Missouri, and my parents had cattle. They've always had cattle.
I like it a lot. It's a good way of living. It's a good way to raise children.
It's cool because we do organic farming, and a lot of farms usually don't do organic farming, so it's kind of special.
I'm a farm kid, so to me it's the only way to be raised. But
Well, I think they learn a lot of responsibility having livestock. You know, they have chores and they learn very early how to take care of animals, and they learn to respect different animals.
My name is Stephen Tilges. I've been living in Nebraska for as long as I can remember.
I play with my sheep and do my chores and other stuff.
Farm livestock, sheep, chickens, all sorts of poultry.
Feeding my lambs, my rabbit, my roosters, and my ducks and the chicks.
Oh, well, I planted peas, onions, radishes, that's all. And I'm going to plant this kind of squash. Well, it's not like a squash, but it's like a ball, and it has a little ball on top, and it's red and white stripes. It's really pretty. Well, you just dig a little hole, and then you put the radish in, and then you kind of step on it. And then you do the same thing to the peas.
Historically, we peaked in the number of people on the farms in the early part of the last century, and we've been losing farm families and numbers of people actually engaged in farming ever since. The Industrial Revolution, which started in England and France in the late 1700s, came into agriculture in the 1800s and arrived here rather quickly. And this is what's essentially transformed agriculture to highly efficient per unit of labor, at least, over the 20th century.
A lot of farms in the state are mostly, cattle, hogs, corn, kind of the monoculture business.
The farms are far less diversified than they used to be now that we have pretty much an industrial model in most areas.
There's only a handful of people that are growing food, a variety of foods for the community. Most people are growing foods for export, growing foods for cattle feed, growing food for fuel, food for fuel.
There's been a great amount of consolidation of farmland, loss of farm family numbers over the last century.